In a fast-paced world where identity is measured by a successful career, what happens when you're left wanting more? But what does faith look like in this day and age? Statistics from the Anglican Church show by 2040 their pews will be empty, and the trend is across denominations. Only 1/10 of Canadians are attending weekly religious services, and COVID-19 lockdowns have accelerated the already declining church attendance.
1 in 4 pastors say they have really no sense of where they're going to be in the next 5 years.
Is it time to rethink church beyond the Sunday service? Half of Canadians say they're agnostic, atheist, or non-religious. And as pastors grasp for the next generation, a new trend is taking shape. Studies show baby boomers are seeking spirituality in retirement. Instead of material wealth, they want spiritual wealth. But it's a more active faith than their parents that they desire. How will the church respond? This week on Context, do declining numbers in religious attendance mean people aren't interested in God, or are people yearning for relationship beyond the Sunday service? The state of faith in this country is ever changing, and as you just saw, the decline of Canadians associating with Christianity in particular is on a steady downturn. Joel Thiessen is a professor at Ambrose University, a sociologist of religion, and is the director of Flourishing Congregations Institute, and has written a number of books on the topic of church trends in Canada. Thanks for joining us today, Joel.
Thanks, Maggie.
So why is there a continuous decline of people associating with faith in Canada? Canadian census data indicates that the share of Canadians who say they are religiously unaffiliated rose from 4% in 1971 to 24% in 2011.
Yeah, there's many different reasons. Some have left behind their religion that they were raised in, reacting against scandals and hypocrisy or negative experiences with others, maybe intellectual disagreements. Some are reacting against the Christian right and religion and politics in the US. But one of the emerging reasons is actually many people are not being raised with any religion, any kind of religious background, and we're seeing that growing over the course of time.
Then on top of that, we've seen Canada become more pluralistic as the numbers of those who associate with Christianity decline, as we said before. A Pew Research in 2018 survey found that roughly 64% of Canadian adults say religion has a less important role in their country than it did 20 years ago. Is the church doing something wrong?
Not necessarily. I mean, there might be some things that churches could give attention to in terms of socializing their children, perhaps in more effective ways, or religious services and programs. But it's important to keep in mind that society around us is changing. It's more secular on many fronts, where religion isn't as central to things like education or media or healthcare or law. And then you have things like affluence and science and technology. All these kinds of things are changing society in ways that impact churches. And you have demographic changes too, immigration, members from other religious traditions or no religion, an aging population. So a variety of things outside of congregations that are impacting church life and the important role that people see for Christianity in the country.
So saying that, as Christians, are we more focused on getting people in the building than finding out how the church can be a place of belonging? As you said, the world is changing. People are not as inclined to raise their children under a faith. So do we have to change our approach?
Yeah, possibly. I think the reality is that few are actually trying to get others into the building. And people aren't necessarily even building relationships with some kind of evangelistic purpose or scope either. I would say that the number one reason from research that a person joins a religious group or gets connected to a faith community is a person invites them into that. And so personal relationships are key to ground that sense of belonging. And so a church can run all kinds of programs, et cetera, but short of those personal ties to invite a person in, it's rather unlikely that a person will come to that church or find and or experience belonging within that church.
We also saw the traditional idea of church really be challenged through the pandemic, which made some ask, what is the church offering that no one else is? 2/3 of Canadians, 67%, said it is not necessary to believe in God in order to be moral or have good values. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the million-dollar question. What does the church offer then during and post-pandemic? And I would say that first and foremost, it provides a place and space to commune with God, with trained experts to help guide people, and secondarily, to actually connect with others. Now, churches don't have the corner of the market on this. People can connect with others and find community in other settings. But I think the real call and opportunities for churches is to teach and embody a thoroughly Christian view of the gospel, of redeemed and restored relationships with self and others and God and creation. And that, as an underlying framework for churches, can actually help it distinctly engage people, engage the community at large, to live in an incarnational way that is quite distinct to the church relative to other kind of social institutions and spaces in society.
And you alluded to this, Joel, just earlier. There was a recent report released by Alpha Canada that found that even the way faith is shared, as you said, has changed. People are more inclined to show how they act out their faith than sit down specifically and share their faith. What does this say to you? And is this a new trend? Is this the way that church is going? Or do we need to recalibrate and think about how we intentionally talk about Jesus?
Yeah, well, and I would say in part, many don't even know much about their own faith in order to tell others about their faith. So that's one of the limitations in play. They don't know how to share their faith, so they lack training. Religious communities may not even be encouraging their own members to do these things. So I think that's some of the pretext for religious communities to keep in mind. And then from a social and societal standpoint, I think some are afraid to share their faith, that they'll be rejected. There's a social cost that comes with being perceived as fairly exclusive in their religious beliefs and practices in a broadly inclusive and tolerant society. So again, it's this interplay between what's happening in society and what's happening within one's own church context or setting.
All right, we're going to have to stop it there. Thank you again, Professor Joel Thiessen, for your time today.
Thank you.
You know, the millennials that we interview, especially these resilient disciples, they say, listen, we want to be out talking about Jesus. He's at the center of our lives. We want to talk about him in our workplaces, in social media, but we want it to be real. We want it to not feel like there is a condo sale at the end of the pitch, or right. I'm becoming friends with someone just to put a notch on the evangelistic belt.
Coming up, I speak to one pastor who says baby boomers are finding faith later on in life. We'll ask her why.
In our fast-paced world, context is everything to the stories that are shaping us. We want to go beyond the headlines in our new podcast to create space for meaningful conversations, to explore where faith intersects with justice, ethics, culture, and society. We'll be joined by newsmakers, peacemakers, and culture shapers. Join us on all podcast platforms or at contextbeyondtheheadlines.com.
A 2020 survey conducted by the University of Lethbridge found that 30% of the baby boomers asked have no doubt God exists. Those, like my next guest, say they are seeing more and more of this particular demographic engage with faith as they seek purpose for the second half of their life. Welcome, Reverend Sheila McGregor, to the show today.
Hi, good to be with you.
So talk to me, Reverend McGregor, about this. The kids have left the house, the nest is empty, and now baby boomers are seeking God?
Well, yes, I find that more and more are returning to church, and they're exploring questions that are primarily spiritual in nature. They're asking themselves, who am I now that the kids have left home and I'm not, mom, dad responsible for everything they do? Who am I now that I no longer have the job or the title or the staff that went with it? Because often they're retired or retiring. And the other big spiritual question they're asking is, what is my legacy? What is my spiritual legacy going to be? So these are all profoundly spiritual questions that the church is well placed to help them with.
In an article for the Globe and Mail, you were quoted saying, I think boomers are anti-institutional and anti-doctrinal. They don't want to be told what to believe, and they don't want to sit in church. They want to be the church. Explain this to me.
Well, I think that they want an opportunity to explore their questions. They have a lot of questions about their faith. They don't want to be told what to believe or to have to go over some dreary, stodgy doctrine. They want to bring their questions. They have questions around mortality, around all the issues that are being presented to them around climate justice, around sexuality, around disease. The COVID-19 pandemic has raised new questions around euthanasia. They're asking all kinds of questions that they want to explore in small study groups, but they don't always want the traditional style Bible studies. They want more freedom. And the other thing is they will come to church, but I think more of them are happier when they're doing church, when they're out there building that urban garden that's going to feed many hungry families in their city, when they're working on a committee to bring refugees to their city, when they're building homes for Habitat for Humanity, or helping in Haiti, or working at the food bank. They want to be the church and do church. They don't want to just sit in a church pew.
And we're seeing the same trend with millennials as well. They are looking to how do we act out our faith as opposed to sitting and watching a show every Sunday. Your church has actually started a community garden as a way of engaging boomers at your church. Tell me about this.
Well, about a year ago, we built this huge garden, and it was pretty well all boomers that built it, that plowed the land, cleared the land, plowed it. We were able to produce over 3,000 pounds of fruits and vegetables that fed many hungry families in the London community. And the food went to several food banks and to people who maybe might not be able to afford to buy such nutritious food. And so fruit, vegetables, and people are really excited. And this is a good example, a good paradigm of being church, of doing church, doing the mission of the church.
Now, I'm curious, for some, is this a new interest in faith, or is this a reintegration into church life and something maybe that was abandoned earlier in life?
Well, I think it's both. What I'm seeing more at Siloam, where I serve, is that it's more of a reintegration of their faith. And they are returning to their roots and exploring the questions that they now bring. Maybe questions that they didn't have time for in their younger years as they were busy building a career and raising a family. And now they have this space of time. And, I think, as I said in that article in the Globe, boomers really made busyness into a virtue. And now this transition into retirement, they are looking for ways to serve. They're looking for ways to use all the wisdom and knowledge that they've accrued in their working life, in their life raising a family, and they're seeking to make a difference. That's the thing about boomers, I believe, is that all their lives they've wanted to make a difference. And churches and synagogues and other faith communities that can harness that wisdom and provide boomers with opportunities to share their hard-earned experience and use their gifts and talents to serve the wider community, I think will be blessed by their presence and will be a blessing to them as well.
All right, Reverend Sheila McGregor, thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome. It was lovely to talk to you.
The Q panel weighs in. Will the church building be a thing of the past? Has COVID changed the church model forever? What does faith look like for baby boomers? And what is the growing desire for relationship over Sunday service telling us? That's next.
We are an undeniable voice, but we are not political. We are media missionaries.
It's been a fascinating look so far into the state of faith in our country. It's now time for the Q panel to weigh in. Back with us this week is Julia Beasley, Calvin Forbes, and Colin Toffelmeyer rounds out this panel. He will also become a familiar face to you all as well. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
All right, Calvin, you're a pastor. Let's start with you. Religious attendance is down. People who identify as Christians are decreasing, and yet there is a yearning for relationship when it comes to faith. What does this all tell you?
Discipleship is super important. Serving is super important. I think a lot of people have been disconnected from the practical elements of walking with people through faith. And so they're missing the thing that they weren't willing to invest in, and it's quite interesting to see.
Colin, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree very strongly with Calvin that discipleship is a very important part of this conversation. People who are leaving church are telling us frequently why they're leaving church. There's lots of pretty good research about this. Socialization issues, politicization of the faith, frustrations with hypocrisy in the church. And I think that discipleship is one of the avenues we have in front of us to start confronting those problems.
And discipleship looks very different to different people, right? So, Colin, we hear that the Anglican Church estimates that by 2040, they will not exist. There will be no people in their pews. That is scary for the Anglican Church, if you're an Anglican listening to this. What does this say to you? And when you talk about discipleship, what does that mean?
Yeah, historically, when we say discipleship in Christianity, what we mean is the training up of people into the faith. And we mean the training up of young people, the next generation into the faith. We mean also training new adherents. So if somebody converts to Christianity, training them up into the faith as well. My colleague Joel Thiessen and his colleague Sarah Wilkins-Laflamme has written pretty extensively on some of the reasons for loss of faith in Canada. And one of the things that they talk about is it has to do with socialization. It has to do with people not being socialized into the faith. And it also has to do with a lot more of an environment of socialization into non-faith in Canada. And I think that the way that we confront that is by teaching our children, by putting resources, time, energy into teaching our children the faith, by putting resources, time, and energy into even sometimes reteaching the faith to the adults who are in our congregations.
Julia, one group that seems to be doing that well is the multicultural church. There has been a surge among the multicultural church. Talk to me about what you're seeing there and why you think there's a surge in that part of the church.
Well, I think part of it is that a lot of them are coming from countries where they're not experiencing the same trends we are here in terms of secularization, this moving away from church attendance, this moving away from religious affiliation. So we've got several generations now who have never attended church, or who maybe attended when they were very small but haven't continued that. And I think with a lot of our immigrant populations, they're not facing those same things, and they come and they just welcome the ability and the opportunity to practice their faith freely. They tend to be very community minded, and so much of our faith practice is a community practice. So I think there's a lot of things at play there that impact that difference that we see between some of our communities and some of the immigrant communities in this respect.
Yeah. I want to stay with you, Julia. How do you see this bleed over into society? You know, we hear that faith is attributed to a healthier marriage, a happier life. We hear all these stats. And yet more and more people are saying they don't want to have anything to do with faith. So how do we equate the two?
Yeah, well, I come from an evangelical context, and I think, we've seen in recent years just this perception of who evangelicals are and what we believe, how we behave, all of these things, and it's quite a negative view. And I don't, frankly, I don't know how much of that is ours to own, but it is nonetheless such a significant part of how we are perceived. Um, and so I think there's had been a tendency, at least with evangelical identity, to try to, when I see what's happening kind of among my peers and some of my age group is this wanting to distance a little bit from that label, from the word evangelical. It's not so much a jettisoning of core evangelical faith, but of that label, because that's not who I am. That's not what my faith is about. That's not the Jesus I love and serve. And so I think that within evangelical circles, that's part of what's happening. And then, we see different, deconstruction is a thing that we hear lots of talk about right now, people sort of deconstructing their faith and kind of stripping away all kinds of things and figuring out what matters, what remains when you strip away some of I think what people would think are non-essentials, right?
Yeah. You stepped in it, so I'm gonna step in it too, Julia. I think that's a great point. I think, there is a lot of connotations that come with the word evangelical. I see Colin nodding his head. Colin, what are your thoughts on that when it comes to the fact that, we hear all these stats of how much faith attributes to positivity in our lives, and yet people are saying, I don't want to have anything to do with it.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we learn from people who are leaving the church is that they're not necessarily leaving the church because they don't believe in the divine, or because they don't have some kind of meaningful faith, or because they don't want the benefits that you're describing. They're frequently leaving the church because they don't see that happening in the church, and they in fact see sometimes the church as a barrier to living out what they see as an ethical, fulfilled spiritual life. And here's a place where I think that we need to think pretty self-critically as a church. One of the things that I think is going on to some degree, at least, is we're reaping what we've sown for quite a long time. And this isn't necessarily something that we're going to lay at the door of every denomination or of every individual person right now in the here and now. But when we look at North American Christianity, we're talking about a religion that has been profoundly involved in cultural genocide, profoundly involved in the North Atlantic slave trade. Just today in France, the release of yet another report about child sexual abuse in the Roman Catholic Church. People who are leaving the faith, one of the things they're telling us is that they see hypocrisy and they don't see ethical follow through, and they don't see a place where they can be, where they can live out their own ethical beliefs. And that's something that I think we need to listen to and to think very carefully about. And the honest truth is, I think that our very first posture in this conversation should be a posture of listening and a posture of repentance for the places where we frankly have in fact failed. I think that's something that we need to spend some time thinking about.
Yeah. So Calvin, as a pastor, as somebody who works at a church, is religious attendance important, and how do we communicate that to a broader group that, as Colin said, wants to disassociate because of a lot of the baggage that we carry?
Yeah, I think it's very important, but it matters who you're meeting with. I think a lot of times we will have a frame that we think this theater style that we have in North America is the best way to communicate. And that's not what people are wanting anymore. If people wanted to go to a school, they would go to a school. If they just wanted a download of information, they can just go to YouTube now, especially with the advances that the church has made for streaming, as we haven't been able to gather as we would like to and have historically done. Now, I think that creating an environment where people are learning and learning together and processing in real time, I think those churches that have a community mindset, that are a little bit smaller, that are a little bit more circular, are going to have greater opportunities to grow. But even there is a problem if it just is a circle looking inward. I think we have to figure out how to reclaim an understanding that this is more than an attendance thing, but we're participating in an uncovering of a kingdom. And so if it's only looking at one another in another format, we're not going to progress.
I'm going to leave the last word to you, Calvin. I'm going to ask you this question. What is the church not asking itself? As we talk about faith and how people are seeing their faith and associating with it, what is the church not asking when it comes to this issue of the decline of people associating with Christianity?
Why are we so certain that we know that this is the way it should be done? And are we okay with unlearning and unknowing and listening more? As Colin said, I think that there's just a lot more listening and reconfiguring who it is that we want to be, but really refocusing on who it is that we are following.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Colin, Julia, and Calvin, thank you so much again for your time.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Maggie.
Faith is so personal and so public at the same time. We choose what to believe and who to follow, and yet how we live that out is complex. And when it comes to why people are walking away from faith, specifically Christianity, well then the complexities abound. Can I be honest? I haven't always displayed my faith well. I haven't always exhibited Jesus fully. And for some, the way we as Christians imitate our Savior can be a turnoff. It has discouraged some from following Jesus. And when we throw social media into the mix, well, let's just say you see the good and the bad of the church. Maybe sometimes the bad more than the good, if we were to be honest. But we can do better and need to be better. We can't be the stumbling blocks that stop someone from exploring faith. We have to imitate Christ the way the Bible calls us to, because there is something beautiful about Jesus that is worth sharing. Let us know what you think of today's topic. Join the conversation. Follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. For all of us here, I'm Maggie John. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
Thank you for your ongoing support of Crossroads, a supporter-funded nonprofit organization and member of the Canadian Centre for Christian Charities. Thanks to faithful people like you, we are able to continue producing context. You can write to Crossroads, P.O. Box 5100, Burlington, Ontario, L7R 4M2, or visit crossroads.ca to learn more about our programs.
Context Beyond the Headlines digs deeper into the critical issues of our age and in the process finds hope amidst our 24/7 news cycle. We are so excited about our brand new season and the launch of a brand new podcast as we go beyond the headlines, finding the connection between faith, justice, culture, society, and ethics. Our goal is to reach a broader audience with relevant stories that will provoke conversation.
Things are starting to change because the world demanded it.
Some of the issues we'll be covering this season: hidden homelessness, vaccine passports, racial injustice, and so much more.
It affects every single one of us, no matter where we live.
As we move forward with this brand new season and the launch of this brand new podcast, would you consider partnering with Context financially? It is because of the generosity of viewers like you that we're able to continue to tell the stories that matter.